I couldn't have asked for a better crew to talk about this movie. This is a stacked panel right here. So, my name is Mr. Marchand, the host of such podcasts as the Monster Island Film Vault and the just launched Henshin Power V3. I'm also an academic, but not nearly as highly decorated as Professor Engels over here, as well as an author of Kaiju books and a writer for, among other things, Kaiju United.
Hi, I'm Jeffrey Engels. I work at Western Michigan University. I'm a specialist in Japanese literature, and I translated Godzilla, and Godzilla Raids Again. We did the first draft of the screenplays for the first two movies. So
we should definitely talk about that, because that first draft is very different. Excellent.
Hello everyone, my name is Daniel DiManna. I am the creator and author of the Godzilla Novelization Project, among other things. Thank you! That touches me, thank you, that's wonderful. And among other things, I'm an academic writer on film history and specifically on monster films. I've written for Kaiju Magazine, G-Fan, Kaiju, and I'm going to be hopefully doing some Kaiju United work here soon. You can hear me on podcasts all over the place, and I'm just going to say it before I pass this down. If you'd have told 6-year-old me that I'd be on the official 70th anniversary Godzilla panel at G-Fest, 6-year-old me would have just walked out of the room without acknowledging that the question was asked, because this is a dream. So this is going to be a fun time.
Hey everybody, my name is Kevin Horn. I'm a martial arts instructor and fitness instructor, but my real love in life is, of course, Kaiju, Godzilla, and all those guys. I'm also an amateur paleontologist, enjoy that field, and I just like to talk a lot, so hey, it'll be fun. Look, here we go.
I'm here. My name is Elijah Thomas. I'm the host of the podcast Kaiju Conversation. I'm a staff contributor to KaijuUnited.com. I also work with SRS Cinema, producing Blu-ray bonus features for all of their Kaiju Tokusatsu titles.
Alright, so I guess we start with some personal stories. So how did you guys all discover this movie? I will admit, I think most of us are probably started with the 56 version, correct? So I guess do we want to talk about actually watching the original cut first, or this the original cut? Okay, so I did not actually see it, the original cut, the 54 version, until it was released by Classic Media. Anyone here remember Classic Media DVDs? I will tell you that the Classic Media edition of this, I would still hold up against my Criterion. Criterion made another great edition, but I think Classic Media would be great too. And it was fascinating watching that, having spent many years being used to the 56 version and being able to finally see the new footage. That, well, the footage that was originally there and seeing how it differs and it also was strangely similar to the original as well. So for me, yeah, Classic Media.
Oh gosh, so I saw the Raven Burr chopped up, bastardized version first. Personally, probably got like so many of us. And I'm like, this movie doesn't really make sense, I was also really disturbed by the fact that Emiko and so on, when we looked at their backs, it was clearly not the same person, It just bothered me so much that I thought, wow, this movie sucks, But yeah, now of course, once I finally watched the original version, it's like, of course, it's the granddaddy of them all, unsurpassable in a way. But it was a huge shock to realize how beautiful the movie was after hating the American version so much. Oh, I can't even remember exactly when I saw it for the first time. I think I probably saw it in Japan. But also titles, years and years later, and I was like, oh my god, this makes so much more sense.
You also have the unique ability to have, and I don't think this is something shared by any of us up here, you don't have subtitles. You don't need them. I mean, that's helpful, but you can understand.
Subtitles, okay?
No, released to about, oh goodness, would have been 18 years ago, 19 years ago. I didn't see it right when it released, but soon after. And again, I grew up watching the Raymond Burr version, the Embassy Pictures version on tape 1,000 times, rented it from the library. Anybody remember Scimitar? Anyone out there? Okay, we got some thumbs up for Scimitar. Yeah, rented that a few times, loved it. But the 54 version was interesting because I got the DVD because it had both cuts, naturally, and that was the beginning of my journey into the Japanese versions. At that point, I'd finally seen all the Godzilla films. I was done. I got through them all. There were 29 at the time. And I thought, what do I do now? It feels like the journey's over. And then I thought, it's not even begun. I haven't seen the Japanese versions of any of them. And I started with 54 because, of course, that's the right place to start. And after having read about it and learned so much, I finally sat down and was just hit over the head by the impact of that film, what it meant then, what it continues to mean now, and fell in love with the same story all over again. And it remains a favorite because, of course, it is. It's Godzilla 54.
Of course, like everybody else, I saw the 56 version first, but luckily living in Los Angeles, I was able to see the original one, no subtitles, though, at the Pan Pacific Theater during a DC Week celebration there one year, back in the early 90s. And so I did get to watch it and everything, and trying to pick up the story and everything, even though I didn't understand what they were saying, because at the time, I thought it was a much better presentation than the 56, and it fit together. Even though I didn't know what they were saying, the story was more coherent and fit together, that's for sure.
Yeah, I don't really have much more to add. I mean, I saw the King of Monsters version first, and a couple of years later, when Classic Media put it out, I finally got to watch the original Japanese version. And then I'm going to talk about first times I also saw it at G-Fest for the first time in theaters for the original 54 one. I believe it was last year. Yes, last year.
Very good.
I just had a curiosity, and I'll put this to the crowd and to everybody here. Did anyone catch it during its limited 2004 release in the States? Because that was when the first time it was officially released with subtitles. Did you saw it?
I did see it, yes.
Yeah, you want to share about that?
Sure. Yeah, the story makes much more sense when you can take the love triangle, between the Sarazawa, the Emiko, and Ogata. It really makes a lot more sense. Also, it made more sense to me. I'm just doing the drama parts right now because Godzilla is awesome where you have subtitles or not. You don't need them with him. But I also, Dr. Yamane, I understood his, disgust and angst for that all the military wanted to do was destroy Godzilla instead of trying to study it and preserve it and learn from it. Maybe how to treat radiation victims and stuff. But yeah, it made a whole lot more sense. And I picked up those other ideas and stuff from that too, so it was great.
Okay, so I think a good place to start, hopefully we can get into some more stuff, is to talk about that early that draft, which I was made aware, as I'm sure a lot of people in this room were, by John LeMay in his books, where he was able to outline what happened in that original script, which I believe, Danny, was called Project G. Is that what it was?
Yes.
Yeah, or just G. Yes, it has a couple different names. Yeah, and I'm sure Professor Engels can tell us a little bit about that. He has an essay actually in the back of his translation that goes over a lot of stuff. It's actually, I think, one of the best parts of the book. Oh, thank you. Yeah, and funny enough, I'm not sure if this is a bit true to a lot of you know, Godzilla was originally going to be an octopus.
That is true. Agent Tsuburaya had a thing, he wanted to do an octopus movie really, really bad, I guess. And he did work them in later, but that was one of the original designs before the dinosaur look was ultimately put together. So imagine how much different the world would be if Godzilla, like just the world in general, like, even if you've never seen a Godzilla movie, you kind of know that shape. He's ubiquitous, he's everywhere, right? Imagine if it was an octopus. Like, would we all even be here?
Yeah, you know what? I would pay someone to do like shorts or artwork or something that reimagines every Godzilla movie with Godzilla as an octopus.
That's true.
So they had Godzilla was to have with a mushroom cloud-shaped head.
Yes.
Yes, at a certain point he did have a mushroom cloud-shaped head, just in case the metaphor wasn't clear enough.
Absolutely.
And I was going to say real quick that, the dinosaurian look, I do believe, came when Tanaka saw the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms by Ray Harryhausen. He was running in Japan at the time, and he said, I need a dinosaur, yeah.
According to some reports, Tanaka actually didn't see Beast from 20,000 Fathoms at all. He already knew of it, but he had not seen it. But the dinosaurian thing clearly, like there's Beast from 20,000 Fathoms lineage there. A lot of Godzilla was actually designed looking at MIFV magazine and other dinosaur books. They just pulled things out, and there were some very famous dinosaur pieces that were used in the creation of the monster, just to kind of combine things. And it was done like it couldn't have been a better combo. You know,
He's basically a T-Rex and a stegosaur.
So Kayama, the guy who wrote the screenplay, was a passionate lover of paleontology. So as soon as he came on board, that clearly determined the direction of the future Godzilla. My understanding is that Toho Studios didn't give him a lot of direction about what kind of monster it should be. They left it up to him to develop the story, to develop, Tanaka gave him the idea, okay, we want to do the radioactive monster thing. He of course had the famous story about him coming back from Indonesia, opening up a magazine, a trade magazine. He found an article about the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, and that was the inspiration for it.
Yeah, he was coming back from Indonesia after a film project fell through.
Correct.
And he's like, I need something to fill the gap left by this.
Right. So they had actually only a very short time to develop the film because this other film had already been quite developed quite far. And so they had a November 1954 release date, and come March, this is when the idea came along, when the previous project fell through. So I think that Tanaka didn't give a huge amount of direction to Kayama about what he wanted to do, because Kayama was such a lover of dinosaurs. Right from the beginning, that was his concept. Kayama only worked on this scenario for the first screenplay for about a week. I've read different accounts from between 7 and 10 days, but it was during those miraculous 7 to 10 days that we basically developed the outlines of the Godzilla story that we know today. But it's really interesting. So now the original G project scenario that he wrote is available. It's really quite easily available in Japan. You can buy it on pretty much any big bookstore. And so if you read that, it's totally fascinating. I wanted to translate this book, but Toho is holding onto the rights. So shame on them. That's not in here. But it's really interesting. Right at the very beginning of this scenario, there's this long passage in which he writes about how he wants to tie the Godzilla 1954 to the events that had happened earlier that year. Right at the very beginning, he set the scenario. He says that he wanted to have a long voiceover which talked about the evils of nuclear weapons, and which talked about the danger of nuclear weapons to the entire universe. And then he wanted to include a bunch of historical footage, like the bombings out in the Marshall Islands where things are being tested. He wanted to include images of the Lucky Dragon number 5, the fisherman who happened to who'd been exposed to the bomb test out in the Pacific. He wanted to include images of people disposing of radioactive tuna in the Japanese marketplaces. And he wanted to do a lot of things that would tie this very clearly into the world of a protest film. But all the people at Toho Studios were like, who did that? Protest films won't make a lot of money. So that all got scrapped. But even with Kayama's ideas of putting historical footage right at the beginning, it's still the anti-nuclear message comes through loud and clear.
Yeah, well, and the interesting thing is while it's not the actual historical footage from Apollo, the Lucky Dragon number 5, we do have the ship at the beginning, clearly inspired by those events, and I would not be surprised if director Shigeru Honda looked at that as okay, we won't use the actual footage, but we will do a fictionalized version of it. So we can obliquely connect.
Exactly. If you look very carefully at the ship that's blown up in the very first few seconds of the film, you'll see that the name of the ship written up on one of the buoys is the Eikomaru number 5, the Glory number 5. And so the number 5 there was a clear reference to things that every Japanese person had read about over and over and over and over in the news, that whole year, 1954. War after these poor fishermen were exposed, you know, in the radioactive tests out in the South Pacific. You know, that became front page news every day for months and months and months. And so we watched the fishermen, you know, die over the course of 1954 in very, very public ways. Yeah. So it's very much in everyone's mind.
Yeah, I was going to say, I do believe that King Kong was on a re-release in Japan at the time also, and so that kind of pumped Tanaka up too to have a giant monster film. I really think so. But I think you let them set up the Honda. All dark.
Now, another interesting thing, talking about like the Lucky Dragon #5, throughout the film there was also a couple of brief references to Hiroshima and Nagasaki with some of the civilians that we followed throughout the film, which were cut out of the 56 version. Yeah, they were cut out of that, which I think is very interesting that they even, I mean, it's so close after the U.S. occupation where they weren't allowed to reference that stuff, that it only came back as subtle references, but it's still there.
And that was remarkably great for them to have done. And some of the reviews at the time actually did kind of call it out as being perhaps a little insensitive, like they were using a tragedy to like sell a movie, but clearly that was never the intention. There was no money grubbing or exploiting the victims of the bombs in the making of this film. This is a protest film, or stock footage or not. This is a protest film. This is a plea to the sane people of the world. Please, look at how insane this is. We cannot let this happen. And it's one of the best examples of taking real life tragedy and a real life threat and telling the audience that this cannot be allowed to happen through the guise of fiction, right? That's how you deliver messages sometimes. That's how you deliver, you know, not even just messages, but like core human truths. You know, warnings, things that people absolutely need to take heed of, or there aren't going to be any people left to take heed of anything. And so, yeah, it was a great thing for them to have done, and it's a level of trauma that, you know, I would imagine most of the people in here hopefully will never fully be able to. We can empathize, but we'll never know how much it just shattered the psyche of entire people on this planet. We'll never know. It's beyond words.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that I do think for the original Japanese audience in 1954, this was very cathartic for them because it allowed them to deal with their trauma to a certain extent through what they're seeing in the movie. They can see themselves as being victims, but not in a way that I feel like is demeaning in any way. It's like they're working through things. I don't want to necessarily say it's meant to be a therapeutic movie necessarily, but you know, I do think that that's the side that was.
But it was.
Yeah.
A good movie for sure. You know, all accounts that I've read of people going to see this movie in 1954, people said that people were weeping. You know, in the studios. You know, all the adults were weeping. You know, the kids might have enjoyed the monster kind of bumping through, but the adults were like were having flashbacks to their own memories of the fire bombings of Tokyo, the fire bombings of just about every major city during World War II. So there was a way in which this film gave the Japanese population an opportunity to work through, to kind of face some of the trauma that they had experienced, and to hopefully work through it a bit. One more thing, just to kind of add on to a point that Elijah made earlier. Between 1945 and 1952, the U.S. and the other Allied powers occupied Japan, and so they put into place a censorship mechanism, which basically the way that it worked was that they hired local Japanese people to read every single script, every single newspaper, every single magazine, every single publication that was released in the country. And then the Japanese native informants would write up summaries and say like, oh, this one has some questionable content or whatever. And there were basically two things that the American occupying forces wanted to kind of clamp down on up until 1952. One of them was discussions about sexual fraternization between GIs and prostitutes. So, you can imagine that that's not necessarily the best thing for winning the hearts and minds of people. And then the other thing was open discussions about the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Because the occupied powers felt that if there was open discussion of that in the press, that would help poison the Japanese population against against occupying powers and to make the occupation that much more difficult. So up until 1952, it was possible to talk about Hiroshima or Nagasaki, in any kind of formal fashion. It wasn't possible to write about it. It wasn't really possible to make movies about it, and so on. So this film, coming in 1954, relatively soon after the end of the occupation in 1952, meant that it was one of the very first movies that actually kind of addressed the impact of Hiroshima and Nagasaki on the Japanese psyche.
Yeah, and I think that's as good a point as any to, I think, pivot to talk about our cast and characters in this, because I do think some of what you were talking about with Professor Ingalls, I think factors into that, especially with our young stars in this, including the great Akira Takarani. I'll try to pull it up here. This is my original Criterion copy of the movie. It's signed by Takarani. Actually, he signed it twice. He signed the book on the inside too. And it's completely shocking because I haven't taken one signature. And so he plays Okata in this, who more or less is our protagonist, but he's not necessarily the most active protagonist in this. And then we had his love interest, Emiko, played by blinking up in this Oh, Kokochi, that's right, yeah. We'll get to the other characters and the other cast here in a moment, but the reason I wanted to bring them up is, you're talking about fraternization between the GIs and Japanese prostitutes, but I think with our young couple, well, we should bring up the Akiko Harada as Sarazawa, because that's important here. So what I find fascinating is with this love triangle, I feel like these three young people show a Japan that is in transition culturally. Because you have the arranged marriage that has been put together between Sarazawa and Emiko, which is a very traditional way of doing things, but she's actually in love with Ogata. And what they're doing, what we would call dating, that was something that was mostly a foreign concept to the Japanese until the occupation. They introduced the idea. And, so for, these characters are all kind of stuck between worlds here. It's what makes the love triangle really fascinating to watch.
Well, yeah, to add to that, I feel like the whole crux of the film really boils down to those three central characters. It really does. The way the script was written, it put them in a position they had to coexist, in a sense, to stop Godzilla. And without Sarazawa's sacrifice, Godzilla would not have been stopped. But the way it was put together is so very intriguing, I think.
Yeah, and another thing that I think is very interesting about the film is early on in the film they visit Odo Island, right? And they learn about the legend of Godzilla from the Odo Islanders. It's this mythical creature that they would sacrifice somebody to have good fishing gear to keep the monster away. And then when you get back to the mainland, you have like Dr. Yamane, who's trying to rationalize the creature. In a way, you kind of get this back and forth between science and the other, the mythos, the legend of Godzilla. And I think that's something that's really interesting for the character, is that background in legend. The Odo Islanders were not wrong. Godzilla was not born out of the atomic bomb. He was there before. So what was he before the atomic bomb? He does have another layer of mystery to him, and I think it's amazing that the film does not explain that. It keeps it vague. It keeps you interested without giving you all the information. I think that's something, especially in Japanese stories, they do a really good job at not giving you everything and just kind of leaving it up to the imagination to really explain it.
I was going to say it's interesting that in the book version and the scenario that Kayama wanted to have more of an explanation about the history of Godzilla there at Odo Island. By the way, Odo, if you write in Japanese, it's the character for big and the door. Just the choice of the name of the island is an indication that this was the great door through which this great monster entered into the world. You know, just the name of the place is wonderfully suggestive. But there is a bit of a backstory, which appears a little bit more in the book version than in the film, in which like an old guy is talking about, oh yeah, back in the day, you know, the legends were that we used to sacrifice young women to this god, so that this god wouldn't come and trample over our islands. Of course, that was all taken from the film, I think, but you know, there is that fun little bit in the text about that.
They do mention sending the maidens down boats.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And there's also a wonderful, wonderful moment in the novel where Godzilla's coming is heralded by the arrival of a comet that comes out of the sky, and the people on the island say that when comets pass over, then bad things are going to happen, or something's going to happen, which is, wouldn't that have been a thing to see in the film? It would have added this whole other layer of the supernatural, which is there by implication. Godzilla is both science fictional and supernatural honestly, by the very nature of being Japanese, I would say, because there is such an interesting combination there in a lot of things. The culture and the religion of Japan and just the tradition of Japan melds into these science fiction films in really fascinating ways, and I think that's a key component of Kaiju, because it's not like anything you see anywhere else. It's so thoroughly Japanese. And Godzilla himself in this film has that supernatural, traditional angle to him, where if you look at it from one side, he's this mutant, but if you look at it from the other side, he's a god, right? He's some kind of, he could be anything. He could be akin to a kami, he could be akin to a yokai, he could be all of these things, but he's also an atomic mutation. Is there one right way to look at it, or is trying to define him missing the points? You know?
To flesh that out a little bit too, you know, another way in which he's multifaceted is the fact that he's both a victimizer, stomping across Tokyo, as well as a victim himself, right? He's someone habitat is destroyed. You know, that's the entire reason that he's stomping out here into the world, you know, causing chaos right and left. So the dual-sidedness of Godzilla, I think, is one of the things that's made him such a productive symbol that we can repurpose and use over and over again, you know, over the course of 70 years of Kaiju Mega.
Yeah, it's one of the most uniquely Japanese things about him. Yeah. And bring up the scientific stuff here. Representing the scientific side of things that we've been talking about is Dr. Yamane, played by who at one point was considered the greatest actor in the world, Takashi Shimura. Shimura was a veteran of Kurosawa films at the time, and which really comes through. He has such tremendous gravitas in this film, and he's a very prominent voice in this. He's similar to a character who was in Beast of 20,000 Fathoms, who in a bit of a subversive story element in that movie was advocating that this creature should be preserved for study. And so that was from Beast, and now it's taken to a whole other level here, because it's one of several dilemmas that our characters are faced with in this film.
You know, that's very, very true. Another thing I noticed about Godzilla's design, I don't know if this is intentional or not, but dragons in a lot of Eastern cultures and Asian cultures, there's a hierarchy system for how many fingers that they have and toes. Godzilla had 4, of course, fingers and 4 toes. And I think that was because the god level, or their emperor, or whoever was in charge that they looked to, had 5. So Godzilla was like one step below that, and as an important creature, but not quite on a god level, or emperor, or ruler level, you might say. So he was above the common dragons with 3 and 2 toes, but he wasn't as, quite to like a big Asian dragon, emperor, you might say.
Yeah, I think honestly, I think one of the best things about Godzilla as a character in the film is his looming presence. You know, there is a huge back and forth on, does Godzilla have enough screen time or not? And in the Kaiju Writers panel, I think this is something I 100% agree with. I don't necessarily think it matters the screen time as much as it is how it's utilized. You know, it's not about the tools, it's about the talents. And so I think one of the most beautiful aspects of the film is just how Godzilla is this moving presence, a godlike figure. You know, you don't see him fully until you're looking up at him from below as he looks over the mountaintop. Before that, you had just seen brief, you know, his thigh here, his foot here, his arm here. That was it. Before that, after that, it was you saw him from this low angle. You never really saw him at the same level. You always had to look up to him. You were always looking up to him as he destroyed something or looked down upon him. And I think that's one of the most beautiful aspects. It's just how they frame the character, how they utilize his presence or its presence to really create a very memorable monster that would go on to be one of history's greatest monsters.
Where do we go from here, right?
We mentioned our cast. We mentioned there are plenty of things we can do, but we certainly can't move on without giving some love service to the visual effects and making it super high.
The great
That really
This, I don't think, was this Subarai's kind of breakout movie, would you say? I mean, I know he did work before this.
He done plenty of work before this. I would say it's certainly, it would end up being the breakout for him going forward because it completely dictated the rest of his career. He'd already gained a lot of notoriety for the miniature work that he'd done for war epics. At the time, for anybody who might not know, he was essentially, he did not serve in the military, but he was in his own way conscripted by the Empire, Japan, to do propaganda films. And he did a lot of military films. He had a fascination with aviation. If you look at most of his films, you'll see a lot of airplanes and a lot of interesting things. Minus One inherited a little bit of his love for aviation, definitely. So this was a guy who also owned a personal print of King Kong, a film that completely, like so many other people, like the Ray Harryhausen's of the world, it changed his life on the other side of the planet at the same time it was changing Ray's life. And he wanted to do a monster movie, and by God, he did. And then he made a lot more of them, and basically helped create an entire genre that, in part at least, is that genre. The intrinsic part of that genre is the visual effects. And at the time, very little of this had ever been done in Japan. There are a lot of famous, anecdotes about how, it would have taken 7 years to do it with stop motion, so they did it with suits. Stories about how they designed the creature, stories about how they built the first costume and it didn't move, and so they had to make another one, and then they made a bunch of other props. Like, so many crazy stories that came from the making of this thing. Most of them are very common knowledge. But the making of this movie was a complete, just new territory. It was uncharted territory in a lot of ways. And a lesser talent at the head of all of this would have said it's not possible, especially considering, as you mentioned, Jeffrey, they had to get this thing done in half a year. They had to have it in the can, in theaters, in half a year. That's insane. And we're just talking visual effects here, because there's also location shooting that has to happen. And we also have to name drop the one and only Dr. Ifukube.
Yeah.
One of cinema's greatest soundscapes, and that includes the music and the roar, which he also worked on. It was a perfect storm of talent. This film could not have asked for a tighter, more probably stress-inducing schedule, but it could not have asked for a better team of people to do what they did in the amount of time they did. These are people that changed the world.
We should mention it, the screenwriter from the NFL.
Yeah, no, that's true.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up, so another interesting thing about Tsuburaya, on top of the fact, I mean, he's been labeled the father of Godzilla, you know, he's credited for basically creating the kaiju genre. But even more so than that, if you go back to some of his earliest works, one of my favorite is his 1925 film that he was more of an assistant on, which was A Page into Madness, where he helped develop the compositing for that film.
It's an incredible film, totally incredible film, a silent film that is trippy, strange, about an insane asylum, and it's fascinating. In an attempt to represent madness visually, it's amazing. I think for the longest time it wasn't available, and it's only recently become available, I think, in the States.
Yeah, it's not unique and stuff like that. Most people are Japanese films.
Right.
A lot of Tsuburaya's early films are completely gone. Just recently, a partial print of one of his earlier films, Kaguya Hime, The Princess from the Moon, a very early screen adaptation of Princess from the Moon, was found and preserved by the British Film Archive. And it's not the complete film, but it exists, and there is hope out there, dear God, that the whole thing exists somewhere. And fun fact, he wanted to remake that film, and never got a chance to before he passed away, but it was remade with him in mind in the 1980s, actually. Yes, Hiroshi Inagaki did end up making that film, and with him in mind. Yuki Adaka is in that film.
Yeah, and you know, the beautiful thing about Tsuburaya is not only, so he produced those, he also worked on Daiei's The Invisible Man Appears. He worked with Daiei for a long time. He actually helped basically establish their special effects departments. So if you look at the course of Tsuburaya's work, he basically invented the concept of tokusatsu, Japanese special effects. And that's something I think a lot of people don't realize is not only did he kind of take on the world of kaiju and reinvent the Kyodai hero of Ultraman and Ultra Q and whatnot, but he was basically the father of modern day Japanese special effects. Everything started with him basically in 1925, and he worked on, he did an all puppet movie called Ramayana in 1941, which utilizes miniatures and whatnot. And he, of course, he worked with Daiei, and those people went on to do The Whale God and Buddha and Demon of Mount Oe, and then those effects people ended up working on Daimajin and the Gamera franchise. And it's really beautiful to see just how Tsuburaya created such an amazing world that we all can love now, whether it be Kamen Rider, or Ultraman, or Godzilla, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, and I'm going to kind of add to that, just to put this into perspective. Although I have to give credit to J.D. Lees for writing this in his compendium. To accomplish in America what Tsuburaya did in Japan, you would have had to have created both Superman and King Kong. That's how big of a deal he is over there. So, I think we got about 10 minutes or so left. I do think we would be remiss if we did not talk about the one thing in the movie that I think is iconic, and I think it really exemplifies the themes of the film. That's the oxygen destroyer and the dilemmas that it creates for our characters. So it's hard to figure out where to even start with that. You know, it's a simple design, but a very science fiction-y looking design as well. But ultimately, you know, the movie comes down to whether or not we can use this. And it was one of those aspects of the film where it's approaching the idea of, it's basically a stand-in for use. You know, it's a WMD, and it's looking at it from a very Japanese perspective. If this had been an American film, there probably wouldn't have been much hesitation to at least try to use it. Now, there's precedent for attempting to use such weaponry in an American film, most notably the early 50s world, where they tried to nuke the Martians, and it does nothing, which is the whole point of the original novel by Wells. But you know, this whole thing just puts all of our characters into such a place, and then ultimately, what it comes down to is Dr. Serizawa, who is meant to be basically an Oppenheimer. You know, the figure of Oppenheimer has gotten very popular thanks to the new film about him. And Serizawa basically solves all the problems in the movie with one decision, which is just absolutely astonishing. Because we have the dilemma of, do we study Godzilla or kill him? Do we use the oxygen destroyer or not? Because famously, Dr. Serizawa says, if I use it, people are going to come after me and want more. And it's just going to start another arms race. And this is the very beginning of the Cold War, so that is very much tension that is going on. And then you have the personal dilemma for Emiko, where she's trying to choose between two men. And then, as we know at the end of the movie, not only does he decide to use it and then burn his nose, he then also allows himself to die, not only to keep somebody from capturing him and getting information out of him, forcing him to build another, but also that way Emiko doesn't have to work.
I got to say one thing, guys, real quick. I don't want to leave this out. I think another actor who was pivotal to the success of this film would, of course, be Nakajima-san. Is to be really very serious, very studious, not to give up, not to fall back. So he went and studied large animals at the zoo just to see how big beasts move. And my God, he created entire actors. It was like an actor studying a theory of kaiju, Suit Nation. I mean, my God, they brought him in on the 66 Ultraman TV series as a Suit Nation teacher, basically, for everyone there. Ben Fromm and who was playing the weekly kaiju creatures. He came in because he created all that. I mean, think, this guy created emotion with a big monster suit, but he couldn't even see his eyes, you couldn't see his face, you couldn't see his mouth. His body movements and body characteristics conveyed the emotions, or at least the intentions, of all the characters that he played. I just had to throw that guy in there.
Yeah, we were
Very good. Is Godzilla's soul, isn't he? He is, and it's such a thing because it's so easy to look at these guys, and the industry really has over the years to say, well, that's a stunt guy, that's a super performer, that's a. Haruo Nakajima was a freaking actor. Okay, that's it. He was an actor. You couldn't put somebody in that suit. And, what he's doing is acting. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I said this during the Satsuma tribute, and I'll say it here again, and I've said it on my podcast, suit actors need more love. That's why I drank a lot of my life. To at least mention their names, because they deserve more credit.
Now, Danny, can you help me out real quick? What was the statistic on how long they could be in the suit for before they had to get pulled out?
5 to 10 minutes. 5 to 10 minutes. And 10 minutes was very rare. So another thing worth mentioning is that, we'll be brief, is that Godzilla was played by two people. Katsubi Tezuka, who was the senior stunt actor on set. And when he, according to Nakajima's testimony, the first time he got in the suit, he fell over and concussed himself. And then Nakajima played the rest of it. Now, who knows how much of that is true? Nakajima might have inflated that a little bit, but neither of them could be in it for that long. They could be in it for about 5 to 10 minutes, and the reason people think that is because the suit would just fall over, because the person in it was unconscious. This film nearly killed 2 men. About a cup of sweat would be drained out of the bottom of the suit every day. That's a pretty famous statistic, and Nakajima famously lost around 20 pounds. The suit weighed 220 pounds. 220 pounds, and it was made out of a potent mixture of reclaimed tire rubber, really, really bad latex rubber, and ready-mixed concrete. Yes, and they used chicken wire and bamboo on the inside for the structure so that it wouldn't fall over on itself, which cut the actors, and it was abrasive, and you couldn't see out of the darn thing. It could stand on its own without a person inside of it. It was a death trap, and it really did almost kill those guys. And not only did it not, thank God, they came back and kept doing it. Nakajima played Godzilla for 18 more years in whole films.
Now, we had a release called Godzilla at 7.
absolutely. I think you should start since it's your idea.
Yeah, okay, I'll start. Yeah, so I'll try and keep this brief so we can get everybody done in time. Godzilla is, I think Gareth Edwards said it best in an interview. If you were to take the silhouette of a dinosaur with plates on its back and show that to anybody on the streets, most of them would be able to say, that's Godzilla. Godzilla is more than just a character, a movie monster. He's iconic. He's a character that has impacted generations of people before it existed and after it existed. Godzilla is something that is almost, I would say, not almost, is certainly timeless. That is something that not many characters, not many things can be. I mean, the list I can think of off the top of my head is like Mickey Mouse, Superman, King Kong, stuff like that, and Godzilla achieved that. And I know for many fans, especially if you've been in fandom for more than about 15 years, you kind of know that Godzilla used to really feel like this niche thing. But when you think about it, even though it's a niche fandom, the character and the iconic nature of it is timeless, and that is not niche. And I think that's something really beautiful about the character.
And the cool thing about Godzilla's legendary status is he can fit into different types of movies and made in different countries. And sometimes they're awesome, and sometimes they're not so awesome. But he can fit anywhere because he's such an iconic character. I do believe, well, it was quite a few years ago, I read like this little survey that said who the most world name recognition was, or word recognition in the world. Both Godzilla and Bruce Lee topped that at 98%.
Very few fictional characters who are as versatile as Godzilla has shown himself to be. I mean, he's gone from the bomb made flesh to a superhero to force of nature and everything else in between. It's rather astonishing. There's a Godzilla out there for everybody. And some people gravitate towards certain ones more than others, and that's perfectly fine. But one thing that I do want to mention is that I do think if you look at the development of this genre that we love so much, that being kaiju media, yes, there were precedents set before Godzilla with the original King Kong, with these 20,000 Fathoms, and there's probably a few other ones that we could point to. But I do think this original film marks a pivot point where the genre materialized into what we know today. And that is something that you can't take away from this film.
I think that one of the key aspects, and this is something that isn't talked about. We've talked about longevity and just the popularity and all of that, but at the end of it, it's like the question is why, right? Why do we keep coming back to this monster? Why do we keep coming back to this original film? Why do we keep coming back to G-Gest, right? What is it about this monster that is now 70 years old and has compelled each and every one of us to wear the shirts, buy the toys, come to the conventions, connect with people and make new friends and connections and be creative and write books, translate books, post podcasts? What is it? It's been 70 years. And there are 1,000 different potential answers to that question, but I think all of them boil down to one thing, and that's the fact that for the last 70 years, Godzilla has brought so much joy into this world, hasn't he? He's brought joy into this world. He's brought joy into the hearts of every single person I'm looking at right now. You're all here because this monster touched you in some way. And that's unique to every single person here. Maybe the metaphor compelled you. Maybe it's purely nostalgia, right? Maybe it's a toy that you owned as a child. Maybe you have, we all have fond memories of this stuff. We all have nostalgic memories. Maybe there are a few of you in here who just now found the series for the first time through the new films, and you're learning and going back. And you're welcome. Yes, welcome. We're fun. or if I'm proud. But at the end of the day, the answer to all those questions is why this thing? Why this thing that we decorate our homes with, and why this thing that we love? Why? It's because of the joy. Because this monster makes us all happy in some way. And why is unique to each of us. But I would argue that the last 70 years of humanity have been a little bit more joyful, perhaps, because Godzilla exists. And I think that's a tremendous part of his legacy, and why he's going to keep going for another 70 years, and hopefully just on and on and on, because he brings us joy.
Actually, that's a really good place to end it. So, perhaps rather than adding all my 2 cents here, for the sake of time, I'd like to forego that.
Where can they find your book?
Oh, so I sold out all the copies today. It's available on Amazon and anywhere books are sold.
I think we do. I think we maybe have time to just make one or two brief questions. Let's see. Yes, I think yes. You start right here.
So, you specifically mentioned that Godzilla is important because it touches all of us in our own unique way. If I may ask, the 5 of you, what is it specifically that Godzilla means to each of you? Why are you attracted to Godzilla? What made you fall in love with him? What is he to you?
You may end up being the only question we take.
How brief can we do this, folks?
Good Lord.
I'm going to cop out and just say that my he brings me joy answer is my answer.
Yeah, exactly.
Every single answer I could give you has a why attached to it, and the end of all of those threads and webs comes back to how darn happy he makes me when I sit and watch his movies. So he just brings me joy. He just makes me happy. He makes my life better.
And I'll take another kind of cop-out answer, even though there's a lot I could say, but part of the joy that I have experienced because of Godzilla is meeting wonderful people, like everybody on this panel table, and many of you out here in the crowd. I can't thank Godzilla enough for that, and I can't thank all of you enough for that.
I think for me, Godzilla represents a hero to me that can take on stuff that normal people can't do, and he can win. He gets knocked down, he gets bloody, but he always gets back up and jams ahead.
Perseverance.
Yeah. Well, that's a deep question.
If I had to answer that honestly, I think for me, I can't think of a time where I didn't like Godzilla. That's something that's eternal with me. The character for me is something that has just always been there, a looming presence, if you will. And I think for me, part of it is just I love filmmaking. That Godzilla is something that got me into filmmaking. That has helped direct my career choices, and all of everything I do is inspired by what I want to be and what I want to do. And if you trace that far enough back, that goes to Godzilla. So in a way, for me, it's just Godzilla's always been there, and Godzilla has helped me go the way I want to go. I've met so many amazing people. I've got to do so many amazing things. And honestly, I can't imagine a life without having Godzilla in it. So I think that's my answer.
I could respond from my heart and talk about why I love him, in terms of kind of emotional reasons, but also too, Godzilla is like a great window into the greatest, most complicated problems of our time, from the 1950s onward to the 2020s. He's gone from being a symbol of nuclear weaponry to kind of an environmental crusader in a way. Someone who maintains the balance of the entire universe. And so, in a way, I love the fact that Godzilla operates in this, intellectual fashion as well as kind of, on an emotional level as well.
definitely come find us and maybe we can answer your questions. But yeah, we're gonna